Somewhere between the ages of 5 and 25, a voice moved into your head and never asked permission to stay. It picked up your mother's impatience, your father's silence, a teacher's disappointment, a stranger's laughter at the wrong moment, and it stitched all of that into a single tone, a tone you now call yourself. You've been listening to it for so long, you stopped noticing it was ever a guest. You think it's thinking. It's not. It's memory wearing your voice. Here's the part almost nobody says out loud. The way you talk to yourself in the dark, in traffic, in the mirror at 2 in the morning, that tone is not neutral. It is not just commentary. It is instruction. Every sentence you whisper to yourself is a command your nervous system obeys without question, the same way a dog obeys a leash it stopped feeling years ago. Confidence, hesitation, the jobs you didn't apply for, the love you didn't ask to stay, trace them back far enough. And they don't start with circumstance. They start with a sentence you said to yourself before anyone else had the chance to disagree. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Most people spend their whole lives trying to change their circumstances, their relationships, their bodies, their bank accounts, while the actual author of all of it sits untouched, unnoticed, running the same script it wrote before you could read. You don't have a life problem. You have an editor problem. Someone left in the room decades ago and you never fired them. What you're about to hear isn't motivation. Motivation fades by Thursday. This is something closer to an exorcism, a way of finding the exact moment that voice was born, naming it, and finally putting your own hands back on the pen. By the end, you won't just think differently. You'll notice for the first time that you were never broken. You were just being narrated by someone who was never you. Nobody sits down at 5 years old and interviews candidates for the voice that will run their mind for the next 80 years. It simply moves in. A father's sharp exhale after a mistake. A teacher's red pen circling the wrong answer instead of the right one. A mother's worry dressed up as criticism. A room full of laughter at the exact second you said the wrong thing. None of it asked permission. All of it stayed, folded itself into a single tone, and somewhere along the way that borrowed tone started calling itself you. By the time anyone is old enough to question it, the voice already feels older than questioning itself. Here's what almost nobody stops to notice. That inner voice has a birthday. It was not always there. There was a version of you, very young, who spoke to himself with the reckless confidence of someone who hadn't yet been told he was too much, too slow, too sensitive, too anything. Somewhere between that child and the adult reading this, an editor moved in and quietly took over the manuscript. The tragedy isn't that the voice is harsh. The tragedy is that so few people ever ask who wrote it in the first place. Think about the last time you made a mistake, some small, forgettable thing, and the reaction inside your head was disproportionate to the moment itself. That reaction wasn't logic. It was inheritance. Psychologists who study early attachment often trace adult self-talk directly back to the tone caregivers used during moments of failure, and the pattern is almost mathematical. Harsh correction in childhood becomes harsh narration in adulthood, word for word, tone for tone, decades later. The voice didn't evolve with you. It got installed, and then it stopped updating. This is not a call to blame anyone, not the parents doing their best with what they were given, not the teachers repeating what was done to them. It's simply an invitation to notice something most people go their whole lives without noticing, the sentence that just ran through your mind when you read that last line, whatever it was, has an author, and that author was never actually you. Picture the one place you can never leave, not for a single second of your entire life, not a house, not a city, not even a body, a room made of thought, where every waking moment of existence actually happens. You eat breakfast in that room. You drive to work in that room. You lie next to someone you love, and even then, you're still standing in that same room, alone. Because no one else has ever been let inside it. Most people spend decades decorating every space around them, their homes, their careers, their image, while never once glancing at the walls of the one room they'll never renovate, never sell, never escape. The furniture in that room isn't wood or fabric. It's language. Every sentence repeated enough times becomes a chair you sit in without thinking, a shelf you reach for automatically, a mirror hung at exactly the height needed to catch you at your worst angle. And here's the strange part. Almost nobody chose this furniture on purpose. It arrived the way old furniture arrives in any inherited house, left behind by whoever lived there before. Never quite matching, never quite comfortable, but familiar enough that moving it feels harder than living around it. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from spending years inside a room you've never actually inspected. It shows up as unexplained fatigue after ordinary days, as dread before events that should feel exciting, as a low hum of unease that never fully resolves no matter how much external life improves. That exhaustion isn't random. It's the cost of living inside a space that was never built for comfort in the first place. A space built instead from someone else's fears, someone else's disappointments, someone else's idea of what you were allowed to become. Here's the quiet shift almost nobody tells you about. The room can be renovated. Not by moving somewhere else, not by achieving something impressive enough to finally deserve better walls, but by doing something far simpler and far harder. Actually walking through it, piece by piece, and asking where each piece came from. Most people never do this. They just keep living in a room decorated by someone else's hands, mistaking the discomfort for personality, mistaking inherited walls for identity itself. Every sentence that runs through the mind on repeat has an origin story, and most people never bother to investigate it. I'm not good enough. I always ruin things. Nobody really wants me around. These phrases feel like conclusions, like facts discovered through careful observation of a lifetime of evidence. But pull on the thread long enough, and something strange happens. The sentence doesn't lead back to evidence at all. It leads back to a moment. A specific afternoon, a specific hallway, kitchen, classroom, a specific person who said something once or said nothing at all, and let silence do the damage instead. This is the part that changes everything once it's understood. Thoughts feel like they're happening in the present tense. Fresh, urgent, true right now. But most of the loudest ones aren't present tense at all. They're recordings. A voice recorded at age 7, age 11, age 16, still playing on a loop decades later, still convincing because repetition disguises itself as truth. The mind rarely distinguishes between a thought that's actually accurate and a thought that's simply old. Both feel equally certain. Only one of them deserves that certainty. There's a practice worth trying the next time a familiar, harsh sentence arrives uninvited. Instead of accepting it, ask it a direct question. Not "is this true?" which the mind will answer automatically and unreliably, but "how old is this? Where does this sentence live? Who said it first?" 9 times out of 10, the sentence traces back to someone who was frightened, overwhelmed, or repeating their own inherited script. Someone whose words were never actually about you, only aimed in your direction because you happened to be standing there. This single shift, treating automatic thoughts as artifacts to be dated rather than facts to be obeyed, is quietly one of the most disorienting and freeing discoveries a person can make about their own mind. It doesn't erase the sentence immediately, but it does something almost as powerful. It puts distance between the voice and the self, and in that small gap, for the first time, a choice becomes possible. Look closely enough at any area of life that feels stuck, and a strange pattern starts to emerge. The bank account that never quite grows. The relationship that keeps repeating its ending before it even begins. The body that resists every attempt at care. On the surface, these look like separate problems requiring separate solutions. But underneath, they often share a single root, one that has nothing to do with effort, luck, or circumstance, and everything to do with the tone of a conversation happening in complete privacy, inside a single mind, every single day. Reality has an uncomfortable habit of matching the frequency of the voice a person carries into it. Someone who speaks to himself with contempt tends to tolerate contempt from others without quite noticing the pattern. Someone who assumes failure before attempting anything tends to abandon projects at the exact moment they require belief to continue. This isn't mysticism, and it isn't about wishing harder for good things to appear. It's closer to physics than magic. The internal tone shapes attention shapes decisions, and decisions repeated over years shape an entire life. Consider two people who lose the same job on the same day. One says to himself, quietly, automatically, "Of course this happened, nothing ever works out for me," and spends the following weeks moving through the world with the posture of someone already defeated, missing opportunities not because they weren't there, but because a defeated posture doesn't recognize opportunity even when it's standing directly in front of it. The other says, "This closes one door because a different one is about to matter more," and moves through those same weeks noticing possibilities the first person's mind had already filtered out before they had a chance to register. Neither person is naive, neither person is lying to himself. They are simply running different internal software, and that software, more than talent, more than circumstance, more than luck, quietly decides what each of them is even capable of perceiving. The outer world rarely changes first. It responds. It reflects. It has always been listening far more closely than anyone realizes. There's a moment, usually arriving somewhere in the middle of real self-examination, when a person realizes something unsettling. They are not their thoughts. This sounds obvious, stated plainly, almost too simple to matter, yet most people spend their entire lives fused completely with whatever crosses their mind, treating every thought as an accurate report from headquarters rather than what it actually is. One voice among many, competing for airtime inside a much larger, quieter space. Carl Jung spent much of his life studying this exact gap, the space between the thinker and the thought, and he gave the unwanted automatic voices a specific name: the shadow. Not evil, not enemy, simply unexamined, the parts of the psyche carrying old fears, old wounds, old inherited rules, operating just beneath conscious awareness and steering behavior from the dark precisely because they were never dragged into the light and looked at directly. Jung's core insight was disarmingly practical. What remains unconscious doesn't disappear. It simply runs the show from backstage. Here's a tool worth using the next time a harsh, automatic thought arrives, uninvited, mid-conversation, mid-decision, mid-anything. Give it a name, out loud or silently, something slightly separate from the self. Not "I think I'm going to fail," but there goes the old fear again, right on schedule. This isn't a trick of positive thinking. It's a deliberate act of separation, consciousness stepping back far enough to observe the pattern instead of drowning inside it. The same way a person can watch a storm through a window without needing to stand out in the rain. This single habit, naming the intruder the moment it speaks, is quietly one of the most effective disruptions available to anyone serious about changing how they experience their own mind. It doesn't require years of training or expensive retreats. It requires only the willingness to pause for one breath longer than usual. And, in that pause, something remarkable becomes available that was never available during full fusion with the thought: the ability to choose. There's an exercise worth trying, quietly, in private, without anyone watching. Imagine someone genuinely loved, a close friend, a child, a partner, in their most vulnerable moment, coming to admit a failure. Now imagine speaking to that person the exact way most people speak to themselves after their own failures. Cold, clipped, contemptuous. Almost nobody can finish that exercise without a flinch of recognition, because almost nobody would ever say those words out loud to someone they cared about. And yet those same words get said, daily, hourly, to the one person a human being can never actually walk away from. This asymmetry reveals something worth sitting with. Compassion, for most people, isn't scarce. It's simply misallocated, flowing generously outward toward friends, children, even strangers, while the person doing all that giving quietly starves. There's a kind of moral confusion hiding inside this pattern. The unspoken belief that self-directed harshness is somehow a form of discipline, that a softer inner voice would lead to laziness, mediocrity, and unearned ease. But the opposite tends to be true. Harsh internal tone doesn't produce excellence, it produces exhaustion dressed up as ambition. Consider what actually happens inside people who receive real compassion during failure rather than punishment. Research on self-compassion consistently shows something counterintuitive. People who treat themselves with the same kindness they'd offer a friend after a mistake tend to take more responsibility for that mistake, not less, and recover faster, trying again sooner, because shame paralyzes while compassion mobilizes. The gentle voice isn't the weak one. It's the one still standing after the harsh voice has already talked someone out of trying again. This doesn't mean abandoning standards or excusing every misstep without reflection. It means something closer to holding standards the way a good mentor holds them, firm about the goal, patient about the process, correcting the mistake without attacking the person who made it. The next failure that arrives, and one always will, offers a small but real choice. Speak to it like an enemy who confirms every fear, or speak to it like someone loved enough to be told the truth gently. There's a version of every person that hasn't fully arrived yet, one who handles pressure differently, speaks with quieter confidence, moves through disappointment without collapsing into it. Most people treat this future self as a fantasy, something to hope for eventually, once circumstances finally align, once enough external proof accumulates to justify the shift. But there's an older, stranger idea worth considering here, one that shows up across mythology, depth psychology, and ancient philosophy alike. That future self isn't waiting to be built from nothing. It already exists, in potential, the way an oak already exists inside an acorn. And the only real question is whether it gets spoken to or spoken over. Jung described this using the language of archetypes, patterns already present in the deep structure of the psyche, waiting less to be invented than to be recognized and lived out. The disciplined person, the calm person, the person who no longer flinches at conflict, isn't a stranger who needs to be manufactured through sheer willpower. That version is already latent, already available, and the fastest way to reach it isn't more effort aimed at the current self. It's rehearsal, speaking, deciding, and responding the way that future self already would, long before the external evidence catches up to confirm it. This is where inner dialogue becomes something closer to a rehearsal room than a courtroom. Instead of asking, "Why can't I do this?" which interrogates the current, limited self, try asking, "How would the version of me who already handles this respond right now?" Athletes have used a version of this for decades, mentally rehearsing the performance before the body ever attempts it. Because the mind struggles to distinguish vividly rehearsed action from lived experience. The same mechanism applies far beyond sport. The voice used today is quietly building tomorrow's default response. None of this requires pretending, And it isn't self-deception dressed up in spiritual language. It's closer to recognizing that identity was never as fixed as it felt, that the harsh, frightened, small-talking voice was only ever one possible narrator, not the only one available. There's another one waiting, patient, already capable, simply outvoted so far by habit and repetition. The moment that voice gets used on purpose, even once, something in the body notices before the mind fully understands why. Every sentence repeated to the self doesn't stay locked in the abstract space of thought. It travels down through the nervous system, into the muscles that tighten before a difficult conversation, into the stomach that clenches before an email gets sent, into the shoulders that carry tension nobody consciously placed there. The body has been listening to every internal conversation for years, taking notes, keeping score, responding to language as though it were instruction rather than commentary. Long before the mind admits something is wrong, the body has usually already been trying to say so. This isn't poetic exaggeration. Chronic harsh self-talk keeps the nervous system in a low, constant state of threat response, the same physiological machinery designed for actual danger, activated instead by a sentence like "I always mess everything up." Cortisol doesn't check whether the threat is a predator or a private thought. It responds to the tone regardless of the source. Over months and years, that constant low-grade activation shows up as poor sleep that never quite restores, as fatigue that rest doesn't fix, as a body that feels tired in a way no amount of vacation seems to touch. Now, consider the reverse. People who shift towards steadier, more compassionate internal dialogue frequently report something that sounds almost too simple to matter: deeper sleep arriving sooner, digestion settling, tension in the jaw and shoulders quietly easing without a single physical intervention. The body wasn't broken. It was responding accurately to years of language it had no choice but to absorb. Change the language, and the body, remarkably loyal, starts responding to the new instructions almost immediately. This is the part worth carrying forward from everything shared so far. The voice inside is not background noise to be tolerated. It is architecture, building a life one sentence at a time. And it is also medicine or poison, chosen fresh with every single thought. The room can be renovated. The recordings can be dated and released. The intruder can be named. The love reserved for others can finally be redirected inward. And the body, patient this whole time, is simply waiting to see which voice gets used next. So here's the only assignment that matters after everything you just heard. Tomorrow morning, before your feet touch the floor, catch the very first sentence your mind hands you. Don't judge it, just catch it. That sentence, whatever it is, has been running your life longer than you've been paying attention, and now you finally know its name. Start smaller than you think you need to. Replace one sentence a day. Not the whole script, not a total personality overhaul by Friday, one line. Instead of "I always mess this up," try "I'm learning this," and learning is allowed to look messy. Instead of "nobody would want this version of me," try "I haven't shown this version to the right room yet." Small edits, repeated daily, are how the voice actually changes. Not a single dramatic breakthrough, but 1,000 quiet corrections nobody else will ever see you make. Carl Jung once said the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But nobody becomes anyone while an old, borrowed voice is still holding the pen. So take it back. Not with anger at the people who shaped that voice. They were narrated too, by someone before them. Take it back with the quiet authority of someone who finally understands the difference between a thought and a fact, between memory and identity. What would your life look like 6 months from now if the only voice left in that room was one that actually believed in you? You're about to find out, but only if you stay in the room long enough to rebuild it. This channel exists for exactly that, the slow, unglamorous, deeply worthwhile work of becoming someone your own voice is proud to speak to. Subscribe, turn on notifications and come back, because the next conversation might be the one that changes which sentence you say first tomorrow morning.